Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Lackritz, and I'm a program manager at the California Public Utilities Commission. In a few moments, we will start our webinar today on the subgrantee selection process. I'm going to wait a few more minutes as we can see people are still joining us, and I'll come back in 2 or 3 minutes so we can get started. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. The first part of the presentation is just going over the meeting interface, so there'll be time for others to join. Welcome to the California Public Utilities Commission's webinar, first in a series on the subgrantee selection process. I'll be joined today with Amy Meacham from CTC, our co-collaborators in this process as we go through the subgrantee selection process. Next slide, please. So on our agenda today, we've gone through a welcome. We'll present an overview of the BEAD program, discussing the program in general for those who haven't attended past webinars. More information can be found in our webinars from earlier this year on the CPUC BEAD's events page. Also encourage you to sign up for notice of future webinars. Amy will go over the application overview, and then we'll close out with some next steps, including a checklist. Both this webinar, which is being recorded, and the checklist will be posted later this week on our website. With that in mind, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items for those of you who are new to using Zoom as a platform in the webinar experience. So there is a closed caption option, which the little CC symbols indicate. You can turn on to show captions in the toolbar. We're asking if folks have questions that they put them in the questions and answer tab, which you'll see there's a Q&A. We will not be answering questions live today, but we will be taking the questions and developing a frequently asked questions document that will be posted on our website in the next couple weeks. The chat feature has been disabled for participants, but we will be using the chat feature to be able to send out important links as we have already done. And last is, for the best viewing experience, we recommend that people select the side-by-side mode, the speaker mode, and then you'll be able to see both the person who's presenting and the slides at the same time. Lastly, I just want to go over that, again, you can find more information about the BEAD program at our website. And there also are service lists that you can sign up to receive future things. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy to present the main portion of our webinar.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to give you just a brief overview of the BEAD program. We've spent a lot of time on giving you this information in earlier presentations, but have some high-level points just to touch base on this before we get into the meat of the pre-qualification and the application review. We can go to the next slide. So just as a reminder, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or the BEAD program, was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021. So it allocates about $42.5 billion of federal funding in all 50 states and territories, as well as Washington, D.C., to close the broadband gap. So meeting, again, with the goal of making sure that high-speed internet access is available throughout the country. This program is administered by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. We can go to the next slide. So the BEAD program has funding priorities, meaning that the funding reaches unserved and underserved areas, or broadband serviceable locations, which tend to be locations that require mass market broadband service, meaning residential or business locations generally. And those locations need to be under 100 megabits per second download or 20 megabits per second upload in order to be considered unserved or underserved. The third priority of the program is community anchor institutions, and those usually need more broadband service, and we're talking about, service to everyone that uses a library, for example, or hospitals. And so if those entities have less than a gigabit symmetrical of service, then they're considered eligible for BEAD. These are the locations that are considered funding priorities and eligible for BEAD deployment services. So specifically in California, you can go to the next slide. California was allocated over $1.8 billion in BEAD funds to do its planning for the BEAD program and to be able to meet the needs of the program. The CPUC has already submitted a number of plans to the federal government in 2023. These include a high-level 5-year action plan, an initial proposal, volume 1, which outlined the challenge process, which has been completed, and initial proposal, volume 2, which is the critical volume for the subgrantee selection process and really your guide to this process. So I highly recommend that you review that before submitting any application materials. It's really critical to understanding the program and understanding California's specific requirements for the program. We can go to the next slide. So a little bit on the BEAD timeline. Again, the timeline starting in Q4, which is right where we are now. The challenge process data was submitted and it's subject to approval, review and revisions, also known as curing by NTIA. The subgrantee selection process will start in the first half of next year, and there are a number of critical points indicated by the red triangle that show where NTIA really needs to approve anything before the next steps can advance. So depending on the timing of NTIA's approval, that may move some of this timeline back further than it's indicated here in this timeline chart. So again, based on this timeline with no delays, provisional awards ideally will be made by Q3 of next year, and then the grant awards by the following year, because all of those awards will go into a final proposal that goes to NTIA, again, for review and approval. And during this entire period, outreach will continue through webinars, office hours, frequently asked questions, and information sessions. So stay tuned to the website and to the email list for further updates. We can go. There are a number of timeline strengths that I think it will be important to understand. The timeline for the BEAD program is extremely short given the federal requirements. And so unlike other grant programs, the BEAD program will have very stringent timelines with little opportunity for CPUC initiated revisions. again, often called curing. So I may use that interchangeably throughout the webinar, and you may hear the term curing in the future. It really means a revision of the documents to make sure that you're meeting the programmatic requirements or the legal requirements as outlined in NTIA's rules. So please pay attention to your CPUC emails and your resources. Please prepare in advance to ensure that you have effective and efficient participation. There are going to be many items that need to be gathered through this process. You can gather those prior to the opening of the application window. The CPUC is going to work hard to make sure that you have information at your fingertips about what's going to be expected, and you can start preparing those materials once you see, once that information is available on the website. I cannot reiterate enough that there's really very little time for revisions. And so please put your best application forward. Please provide the information that's requested. A lot of the information will be provided through templates or be templated, meaning provided in a certain format. It makes the process much more uniform that way. And so providing some sort of a quality product is really critical to your success and to California's success in this process. So with that in mind, who can participate in the BEAD program? A wide variety of participants are allowed and really encouraged through the BEAD program, and this may include, public-private partnerships, private internet service providers, local governments, tribal governments and other tribal entities, cooperatives, public utilities or private utilities, public utility districts, nonprofits, and I've already mentioned public-private partnerships. But again, all of these entities, as an applicant, you must be prepared and qualified to build broadband infrastructure. That qualification can come in a number of ways, which we'll go over in a bit, but the CPUC is going to request information in advance about the experience that you bring to bear, the resources that you bring to bear in order to be successful in the BEAD program and meet the BEAD program's standards. So I want to turn a little bit to the elements of subgrantee selection. There are three primary elements. These include qualifications that each applicant must meet in order to participate in the BEAD program. These are dictated by the federal government, but they're also common sense, and we'll go over those in a bit. Project details that applicants must submit in order to actually score the applications. And this BEAD is really based first and foremost on scoring, and that will be dealt with in a later webinar, but it is important to understand what those scoring elements are and why the project details are requested. And so that again is available as part of the initial proposal volume 2, and recommend going back and looking at that section in especially fine detail. Scoring criteria, again, that will be used to evaluate the application. So if we can go to the next slide, talk a little bit about the timeline. So in each of these phases, you'll see a similar set of, timeline in terms of CPUC will release materials. They will then hold a workshop or a webinar or a series of webinars, and you're going to see a series of webinars in this case. And then once the grants management system and the grants application period opens, then the CPUC will accept the application. When that period closes, or on a rolling basis, depending on the period, then there will be an announcement of pre-qualification determinations, and then pre-qualified applicants can then go and apply in the scoring phase with the sort of same cadence of there will be materials released, Applicants will be able to prepare a lot of their materials in advance. And then there will be a series of application webinars, and then applications will be accepted. Those applications will be reviewed and likely cured or requested revisions. And once those are accepted, then they go through scoring and negotiation process. Any changes based on that may require further updates to the application or additional curing. And then as the CPUC fills in the gaps and accepts which awards fit in which sections, so each project area unit will get an award selection. If you once that is complete, then all of that data will be pulled together into a final submission along with other materials that NTIA requires, and that will then be submitted to the federal government and put out for public comment. And that is really not expected until October of next year. Now we're going to go to the application overview. I want to talk a little bit about the pre-qualification application. As I discussed just a little bit ago, the CPUC is going to first run an initial pre-qualification application round. This is going to come before the main or the scoring round is opened. This really gives applicants a chance to get ahead on many of the components that are required, and it makes sure that folks who are actually applying for the awards have a basic level of qualification. So it's really critical as part of this phase to provide sufficient information on organizational, managerial, technical qualifications for an award. There'll be quite a number of pieces of information that will be required to make sure that each subgrantee has required qualifications. This may include basics from SAM.gov registrations, which we really highly recommend that you start looking at now if you do not have a SAM.gov registration, which is a required element of all awards. It does take a while. It may take several weeks or longer in order to get approval for that registration. Start thinking about that now, pulling together resumes of key personnel, making sure that you have an organizational chart, specific contact information. You also have someone who can bind the company that can sign all the certifications. You have the financial documentation, including audit information or equivalent as requested, past performance in broadband projects, other public projects that you may be applying for. Again, it's a series of information, and you want to start thinking about what that will look like, and more information about the specific questions will be released when the pre-qualification application is made public. Now I'm going to talk about and give you a bit of an overview of what that main application component looks like in terms of the components and a little bit about specific pieces of that. So if we look at there's probably about 9 parts of the application, and it's everything that you see here, from administrative to project-specific details, organizational, managerial capability, financial capability, and then many of the compliance requirements of the BEAD program, including labor and project staffing, sufficient workforce, and then ownership and other compliance requirements as well. Let's go to the project snapshot section. This really aims to quickly capture project information and allows for interim reporting. This requested information includes an estimated number of aerial and buried fiber miles, match amounts, and sources for applicants, and a very short project description. if we can move into the scoring requirements, NTIA actually mandates, and I know you've heard this in other webinars that provide overviews, but NTIA mandates quite a number of the scoring criteria that the CPUC must include as part of their evaluation. The primary criteria must be 75% of the total points, and then also some of the secondary criteria are also required by NTIA, and then other scoring criteria was customized in Initial Proposal Volume 2. There's more in-depth information in IPv2, and that information will be presented in depth in a future webinar. But you can see here that scoring for priority broadband projects, which end-to-end fiber projects, and any project that is not an end-to-end fiber project, or that is partially an end-to-end project or a fiber project and partially something else that would be considered by NTIA to be a reliable broadband project, will not be considered a priority broadband project. So you will hear this again, but I just want to repeat, priority broadband projects, according to IPv2 and NTIA's rules, are end-to-end fiber projects only. There is one difference, again, that you'll see in the second slide here between priority projects and non-priority projects. Affordability, labor practices, and minimum BEAD outlay are the primary criteria. And together they're worth 75% of the points. The rest of these criteria, the speed to deployment, equity, low income, which includes points for low income areas and disadvantaged communities, and resilience, which include points for resilience for climate hazards. In the next slide, scoring criteria for other last mile broadband deployment projects include the same primary scoring criteria. And then again, these other last mile broadband projects include hybrid fiber coax and licensed fixed wireless projects. The scoring rubric's very similar, and the criteria of technical capability is also included here as well. Let me talk a little bit about the project plan that is also required, and this gives the CPUC a chance to understand how you are thinking about your project, understand that you know how to design a project, that you can provide the information that's required, and that you will be a qualified grantee from a technical perspective. So this is going to include a technical narrative, a logical network design, project cost, project timeline. It also requires a professional engineering certification. NTIA has a waiver now, so that certification can generally come from any state, but it does require a professional engineering certificate, additional certifications for program compliance, and if it is a non-priority project, a fixed wireless design. The organizational and managerial capacity sections allow for subgrantee applicants to update materials submitted during pre-qualification, but really this is during pre-qualification, these materials are going to include an organizational chart, they're going to include key personnel resumes, they're going to include a number of required pieces of information to show, again, that the organization has the capability to run a large project, that it contracts or has personnel that know how to build broadband networks, and really, again, it's a minimum criteria in order to have a broadband award. So what is new, though, which is not going to be required, is a legal opinion until later, is additional certifications for program compliance. For the financial capability, This section will capture project-specific financial information, including the letter of credit or waiver. And so BEAD requires that applicants show that they are able to get a letter of credit or a bond that from a surety to cover their financial obligations, which are typically matched under the award. During the application phase, the CPUC just needs to see that applicants are capable of obtaining that letter of credit or bond, and that once a project is awarded, then that during the subgrant agreement, that letter of credit or bond must be issued and provided at that time. Also, a pro forma or business case for the project must be completed and provided. A template is likely to be provided to make that a bit easier for applicants. And then there are, again, not surprisingly, additional certifications for program compliance. As noted, the CPUC will develop templates to make some of this a little bit easier and make it clear what is expected from the pro forma or the business case. Now, if we move into the staffing or labor requirements, that will capture, again, additional information on a subgrantee's workforce or an applicant's workforce plans, the structure, how they, what technical requirements they require staff to have, what training they provide staff, the licenses, certifications, project-specific resumes. So if your key personnel include certain technical, managerial, operational staff, but you have a project manager that will be dedicated to the project, then that additional resume would be added during the subgrantee selection phase. And then again, certifications for program compliance. If we move on to ownership information, this section allows subgrantee applicants to initially, during the prequalification phase, there's a required template for ownership information. This is for those familiar with FCC filings. This 10% ownership is a typical requirement of FCC funded projects, and so it's similarly required in BEAD funded projects. And that information, if there are changes in ownership, which we know that is entirely possible during the course of an application period, that needs to be documented during the scoring phase. And then the CPUC will publish a template for applicants to upload this information. Now, the compliance section allows subgrantees to demonstrate awareness and understanding of various program requirements. And this includes everything from commitments to a low-cost plan as required by BEAD, commitments to participating in any ACP successor program, again, identified by NTIA, commitments to provide a binding resolution of consent if constructing on any tribal lands, and an understanding of various federal and state program requirements, which can be anything from National Environmental Environmental and Historic Preservation requirements, Build America, Buy America requirements, and other requirements that the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity has laid out. Now let's get into how projects will be selected. Projects will be ranked according to technology and the highest score. So I mentioned earlier that scoring is really important. The program is required to prioritize the highest scoring end-to-end fiber applicants first. To be selected, the project must fit within the CPUC's anticipated budget, given the amount of funding that is available for the state to reach 100% of unserved and underserved locations. So it's really important to think about in terms of how you structure your application. So again, I'm just going to emphasize again, please go back to the initial proposal, volume 2. It is your resource for how these projects will be scored. And there is a detailed scoring rubric that's included with this, with the IPv2 as well, that will give you details about how to think about what your score will look like and how you can boost your score by having more or less of one of the particular components of the scoring requirements that we just went through. So let's go to next steps. So the CPUC has made and published an initial checklist for pre-qualification and the main application, and these are available on the CPUC's website. Some of those items take several months or considerable coordination to pull together, and that is why we're telling you now. We're trying to make this easy and show you what's needed. There are a lot of materials, as you will see from these checklists, to start pulling together. And I'm going to go back to, please think about if you're ready to apply or you're thinking about applying and you do not have a sam.gov registration yet, go think about getting that set up so you don't have to wait for that when you have other materials together and the application window opens. And you can also easily start pulling together some of your financial information, some of the organizational information, and start thinking about working with a financial institution on your letter of credit requirements or surety on equivalent bonding requirements. Now, if we can go to the next slide. There's also information on past performance and other public funding that your organization has obtained or is pursuing currently. And for some of those national organizations, you really want to think about starting to gather that information now for past performance. Think about projects, again, especially federally funded projects of a similar size and scale as to what you're planning for BEAD or what you're thinking about planning. And then for other public funding, NTI's guidance is very clear that means all public funding that you're thinking about or have obtained recently. And so really, depending again on the size of your organization, that may be a lot, that might not be a lot, but if you know it's going to be a lot, start working with your organization and start pulling that together. Okay, and then there's a couple important reminders that we want to get into, and that's you really must check your application for completeness, quality, accuracy. There will be, as I noted before, very little time for revisions or curing compared to past programs. I think in the past, the CPUC has had a little more latitude, but these deadlines are federally driven, and so there's not a lot of latitude. And the longer these timelines, the longer NTI delays certain things or the federal government delays approving certain things, the shorter these timelines are going to get. So as I noted, please start preparing your elements now. The checklists give you a really great sense of what you're going to need. And then if you need clarifications from the CPUC, please seek those from the CPUC staff and the CPUC caseworkers. The CPUC is going to continue to provide webinars, office hours, FAQs. And then again, outreach and assistance will be based on strict NTI rules to keep those opportunities open to everyone. So really looking to provide, this is why those rules were set forth at the beginning, looking to provide those answers on an equal basis to all applicants. And so it's really critical that everyone has access to the same information. You should also email the inbox or attend office hours if you have any questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jonathan. Jonathan, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry, yes, I am. Apologies, everyone. So we'll be holding webinars on Tuesdays at the same time, 1 to 2. And starting in January, we'll be hosting office hours on Thursdays from 1 to 2. On the screen here, you will see we have 2 more webinars in December and our start of our office hours in January. We will have more than 2 more webinars, but these are the next 2 that are coming up. We encourage webinars are open to all who wish to attend, and registration links will be posted on the BEAD events page. And the next 2 webinars are going to cover the design of app program design and program evaluation. So participants in the program have a better sense of how their applications will be evaluated and how we will be making awards. Next slide, please. This slide has quite a few references. It's not an exhaustive list. We also encourage you to go to the NTI website for more information. We will continue posting references on our own website too and cross-linking between the two. If you have questions, the last reminder is that we will be posting this webinar, recording this webinar, and also the checklist on our website later this week. If you have questions in the meantime or after you've reviewed the materials, please go ahead and send those questions to beadgrant@cpuc.ca.gov, and we will try to address them in as timely a manner as possible. And as a last reminder, the general format we're going to be following is we'll be making presentations at these webinars and then posting recordings afterwards. I think with that, I will end today's webinar. I want to thank Amy and all those of you who attended. The subgrantee selection process is a large process, so please feel free to reach out to us. Also encourage you to keep going to our website to check for updates. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar and in office hours starting in January. Thank you.